The company dinner was supposed to be a simple, uneventful evening. James had no expectations, just a night out to celebrate another successful quarter with his colleagues. He had been looking forward to some time away from the grind, to spend a relaxed evening with his wife, Laura, in the company of familiar faces. But as soon as they arrived at the venue, James noticed something off. Laura, usually the picture of composure, was acting strangely distant. She smiled politely as they mingled with the other guests, but there was something in her eyes, a lack of focus, as if her mind were somewhere else. The evening started normally enough, but with every passing moment, James couldn't shake the growing sense of unease that gnawed at him. As the night wore on, things took a turn he wasn't prepared for. Laura was laughing, a little too loudly, at something one of the men at the table said. The man, a colleague of hers, was leaning in a little too close, his hand lingering on her arm for just a moment too long. James shifted in his seat, trying to push away the creeping discomfort. But as the man laughed again, his hand brushed against Laura's back, a touch that lingered a second too long. Laura didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, looking at him in a way James hadn't seen before. There was warmth there, an intimacy he had never felt between them in front of anyone else. His stomach twisted, and his breath caught. He turned to look at Laura, who was still engaged in conversation with the man. He could see the subtle way she was leaning in, her body turned toward him, her laughter too easy, too natural. It didn't seem like the polite banter you would expect at a work event. It seemed familiar. Comfortable. Something wasn't right. His heart started to race, but he couldn't find the words to ask her what was happening. Maybe it was just a harmless interaction, maybe he was overthinking it. But the longer he watched, the more the unease grew. There was an electric tension between them, and James couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just friendly flirting, it was something more. Before he could process it any further, their eyes met briefly across the table. Laura looked at him, her smile faltering, but only for a second before she turned her attention back to the man beside her. James felt something shift inside him. The woman he had trusted for years, the woman he had shared everything with, was standing right in front of him, but in that moment, she felt like a stranger. James and Laura had always been the kind of couple that others admired. Their relationship seemed like a perfect match, two people who understood each other deeply, who supported each other's dreams, and who built a life that felt solid and real. They had met when they were both fresh out of college. James had been immediately drawn to her quick wit, her passion for life, and her effortless charm. Laura, for her part, found James easy to talk to and genuinely caring. It didn't take long for their friendship to blossom into something more. In the early years, their relationship was full of excitement and spontaneity. They'd travel together on weekends, exploring new cities, hiking through mountains, or just sitting in quiet cafes, sharing their thoughts. They laughed a lot, loved even more, and every challenge they faced only seemed to bring them closer together. When they decided to get married, it felt like the next natural step in a beautiful journey. Fast forward to their 10-year anniversary, and they had created a life together that was enviable. A comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood, 2 beautiful children, and careers that provided financial security. They had shared goals, to build a future, to raise their kids right, and to continue the life they had started together. The foundation they had built seemed rock solid. They had worked hard to get where they were, and they both felt the satisfaction of having built something lasting. But in the last couple of years, James had begun to notice subtle changes in their relationship. At first, they were easy to dismiss. Laura's job had become more demanding, and James had been busy with his own projects. They had kids now, and the routine of daily life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. But as the months passed, James began to feel a slight distance between them. It wasn't anything major, but there were signs: the late nights at work, the occasional quiet dinners with Laura buried in her phone, the brief exchanges that seemed to lack the warmth they once shared. For a long time, James didn't want to face it. He convinced himself it was just a rough patch, that they were both just tired from juggling everything. He kept telling himself that things would get back to normal, that it was just the stress of life getting in the way. But deep down, he knew something had shifted. And he couldn't put his finger on why. It was a Thursday afternoon when Laura brought up the idea of the company dinner. James had been looking forward to the event, albeit with a little apprehension. It had been months since they had gone out as a couple, and while he enjoyed the idea of mingling with her colleagues, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Laura had been working late more often, and even though the company dinner was a casual affair, he couldn't help but wonder if it would be another event where he would be left alone, trying to find ways to pass the time while she socialized with others. "I'm looking forward to tonight," Laura said as she casually sipped her coffee one morning. "I think it'll be a nice change of pace." James looked up from his phone. "Yeah, me too," he replied, trying to mask his unease. He hadn't asked much about the event, but it was clear that Laura had been preparing for it for days. "It'll be good to see everyone outside the office." "Actually," she said, almost as if she had been waiting for the right moment, "I was thinking of making a weekend of it." "A weekend?" James raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Well, you know," Laura replied, her voice light, "I've been feeling really stressed lately, and I think it would do me good to get away for a bit. Just 2 days and 1 night. You know, to unwind. I thought I'd head up to the cabin in the mountains. I can relax, maybe do a little hiking, and just clear my head. It'll only be for a night, and then I'll be back." James blinked, taken aback. He hadn't expected this. Their family time had become more of a routine in recent months. Laura's long work hours, combined with the kids' extracurricular activities, had left little room for spontaneity. The idea of her going away alone wasn't something they had ever discussed. "Are you sure?" James asked, trying to hide the unease creeping into his voice. "You want to go by yourself? You've been working hard, but maybe we can plan something together instead." Laura smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, James. I really think I need some time for myself. It's nothing personal, I just need a break. I'll be back before you even miss me." For a moment, James stood there, unsure of what to say. The request seemed out of character for her. Laura had always been someone who enjoyed sharing things, doing things together, even when it was just watching a movie at home. Her sudden desire to take a solo trip felt off. He wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to stress, but something inside him felt unsettled. "I don't know, Laura," he said carefully. "I mean, you're gone enough as it is with work. Do you really need to be alone for the weekend? We've been disconnected lately. I thought maybe we could spend some time together." She brushed off his concerns with a wave of her hand. "I promise, James, I'll be back soon, and we can talk. I just need some space for a bit. Please, trust me." James knew better than to push it further at that moment. He could see that she wasn't in the mood for a serious discussion. And so, he reluctantly agreed. But inside, his doubts continued to fester. Why did she need space now? Why not take a weekend away together, like they had in the past? The days leading up to the company dinner were filled with an undercurrent of tension that James couldn't shake off. Laura's behavior had become even more distant, and she was almost entirely absorbed in preparations for the trip. She spent hours on the phone with her colleagues, finalizing plans for the cabin. When James asked her who she was going with, she gave a vague answer. "Just some friends from work." "You don't know them." The words felt like a subtle brush-off. James, trying not to be suspicious, pushed the thoughts aside. But they kept nagging at him. There was a part of him that still trusted Laura, still believed that everything was fine, but the more he observed her behavior, the more it felt like something was off. One evening, when he came home early from work, he found Laura sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in her hand. When she saw him enter, she quickly hid the phone, an almost instinctive reaction that caught him off guard. He tried not to make it a big deal, but the moment lingered in the back of his mind. Why was she hiding her phone? Was there something she didn't want him to see? As the company dinner approached, James tried to push the doubts aside, but the nagging feeling in his gut grew stronger. When the night of the event arrived, he couldn't shake the anxiety that gripped him. He had hoped for a night where they could reconnect, where they could laugh and talk, but instead, he found himself watching Laura as she mingled, her attention seemingly elsewhere. And then, it happened, the moment that changed everything. The company dinner had reached its peak. The laughter from colleagues and the clinking of glasses filled the room, but James couldn't shake the tightness in his chest. Laura had been floating from conversation to conversation, smiling at everyone with a kind of ease that was becoming increasingly unsettling. The way she moved, the way she laughed, and most notably, the way she interacted with him, Eric, the colleague who had been by her side all evening. At first, James tried to ignore the nagging feeling creeping up his spine. He tried to focus on the discussions around him, forced himself to smile and engage with people, but his eyes kept drifting back to Laura and Eric. They were leaning in closer than necessary, exchanging glances that seemed far more intimate than anything James had witnessed in public before. Every time they laughed, the connection between them felt electric, and the subtle touches, Eric's hand brushing against her back, Laura placing her hand on his arm, sent a cold shiver down his spine. It was as though everything around him had faded, leaving only the sharp, jarring awareness of his wife, his partner, and her flirtation with someone else. James had always been a trusting husband. He believed in the vows they had made, in the bond they had shared over the years. But tonight, something inside him was unraveling. Every instinct screamed that there was something more to their interaction than just professional camaraderie. The final straw came when Eric leaned in a little too close to Laura, whispering something in her ear that made her blush and laugh, genuinely laugh. Not the polite chuckles she offered to other colleagues, but a deep, intimate laugh. Something that felt personal. Something that made James feel like an outsider in the very life they had built together. His heart pounded in his chest, and before he knew it, he was standing up, his legs moving on their own. "Laura," he said, his voice low but firm, as he approached them at the bar where they had gathered. She turned to him with a smile, but her eyes were hesitant, guilty, even. "Hey, James," she said, clearly startled by his sudden appearance. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep the calm facade intact. "I just wanted to talk to you." Eric, sensing the tension, excused himself with a quick nod, but James barely noticed. All his focus was on Laura, standing there in front of him, looking almost too composed. The woman who had shared his life for so many years, the woman he thought he knew, now felt like a stranger. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" James asked, his voice tight, trying to keep his anger in check. "What's happening between you and Eric?" Laura hesitated for a moment, then looked down at her glass, avoiding his gaze. The guilt on her face was evident, but it didn't stop her from speaking. "It's not what you think, James," she began, her voice shaking just slightly. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" James couldn't hide the bitterness in his tone now. "How is it complicated? You're standing here with him, laughing with him, while I'm sitting in the corner, trying to pretend everything's okay." "It's not complicated, Laura. You're cheating on me. With him." Her eyes widened at the bluntness of his words, but she didn't argue. Instead, she took a deep breath, letting the weight of the truth sink in. "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "It just happened. Eric and we started talking a few months ago, and one thing led to another. It wasn't planned." James stood frozen, the revelation sinking in like a heavy stone. His mind raced back through the months, through all the small signs he had ignored, the late nights, the distance, the absence. He had been so blind to it, so eager to believe everything was okay, to believe in the woman he had loved and trusted. Now, it all made sense. Every moment, every doubt, every small detail that had felt off, it was all a lie. So you've been seeing him behind my back for months? James's voice cracked, and he took a step back as the weight of the betrayal hit him like a freight train. You've been lying to me, to our family, and you're telling me it just happened? Laura's face softened with regret, but her explanation did little to comfort him. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, her voice shaky. I was unhappy, James. I felt neglected, I felt alone. And Eric was there. He understood me in ways I didn't know I needed. I never wanted to hurt you. But I lost control. James's heart twisted in his chest as he listened to her words. He had been so sure of their love, so certain of their bond. But here she was, explaining how she had found solace in someone else, someone who had never been a part of their life, someone who had infiltrated their world without him even knowing. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. And you think this justifies everything? James asked, his voice rising. You think I can just forgive you because you felt neglected? You've been planning this behind my back, Laura. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a choice. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time in the conversation, Laura seemed genuinely broken. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know how to get out of it. I didn't know how to fix it. James looked at her, the woman he had once shared everything with, the woman who had been the center of his world. Now, he didn't recognize her. Her face, once familiar, felt like a stranger's. And the trust they had built over the years had been shattered beyond repair. The silence that followed felt like a weight pressing down on his chest, suffocating him. Every word, every movement, every glance felt like another nail in the coffin of their relationship. He had given her everything. He had trusted her. And now, that trust was gone. But as the words continued to swirl in his mind, something else became clear. He didn't just feel anger or betrayal. He felt numb. He was staring at his wife, but it wasn't just her face he was seeing. It was the future he had imagined, the life they had built, unraveling in front of him. It was everything falling apart, piece by piece, and he didn't know how to stop it. As he walked away from her, heading toward the door, he couldn't bring himself to look back. The finality of it all hit him like a wave. This wasn't just the end of a night. This was the end of everything they had shared. And as he left the dinner behind, his thoughts were flooded with one haunting question: how do you move forward when everything you thought you knew is a lie? James walked out of the restaurant, the cool night air biting at his skin. He could barely feel it, though. His mind was consumed by the storm raging inside him. Every step felt heavier than the last. The man he had trusted, the woman he had loved, everything had come crashing down in front of him. He was walking through life, but it didn't feel like his anymore. As he made his way back to the car, his mind kept replaying the scene: Laura's tear-filled face, her broken apologies, her feeble justifications. She was unhappy, she said. She felt neglected. But none of that mattered to James anymore. The trust they had built, the years they had spent together, had all been shattered in an instant, and no amount of tears or regret could undo the damage. Was this how it ended? The thought swirled in his mind, and he couldn't find the answer. How do you end something like this? How do you move on when the person you thought was your partner, your soulmate, has torn your life apart without a second thought? He reached the car and stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where Laura had once been. They had shared so many moments together, so many laughs, so many plans. But now, it all seemed like a distant memory, a fantasy that was too fragile to last. He didn't know what to do. Should he confront Laura again? Should he ask for more explanations, more answers? But what good would that do? There were no more answers left to find. The truth was laid bare in front of him. Laura had betrayed him, not just with another man, but with a person he had trusted. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything that had led up to it, the distance between them, the lies, the way she had checked out emotionally long before he ever realized it. The pain in his chest was a constant, gnawing reminder of what had been lost. But there was something else too. Beneath the anger, beneath the hurt, there was a flicker of something else, a feeling he couldn't quite put into words. Was it relief? Maybe. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment when he could start to rebuild. Maybe this was his opportunity to finally take control of his own life, to find out who he was outside of the relationship, outside of the pain. For the first time in years, James realized that his future wasn't entirely defined by Laura anymore. But could he ever trust again? Could he ever love again? The questions lingered in his mind as he drove through the empty streets. He didn't have answers, not yet. The road ahead felt unclear, and the thought of walking it alone was terrifying. But one thing was certain, he couldn't go back to the way things were. The house he returned to was empty, just him and the silence. The silence that had once felt comforting now felt oppressive, almost suffocating. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the life they had built. The pictures on the walls, the family photos, the memories of their time together. And then, something shifted inside him. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a deep, unsettling feeling of loss, but not just of his wife. It was the loss of the version of himself that had existed in that marriage. He had been a husband, a father, a partner. But now, he didn't know who he was. He wasn't sure what role he played in the world anymore, and the uncertainty weighed heavily on his chest. But he couldn't stay there, stuck in this moment forever. The thought came to him unexpectedly: what happens next? What was he supposed to do now that everything he had believed in had been destroyed? Was he supposed to pick up the pieces and try to put them back together, like trying to restore a broken vase? Or did he walk away from the life he had spent so many years building, and forge a new path? The questions haunted him. The truth was clear, but the way forward was not. He wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He wasn't even sure if he wanted to fix things. But could he heal from this? Could he learn to live with the pain and still move forward? In the days that followed, the shock of the betrayal began to wear off, but the emptiness lingered. James went through the motions, trying to keep up appearances for his children, trying to stay busy with work and responsibilities. But the silence in the house, the hollow feeling in his heart, were constant companions. There were moments when he found himself wishing things could go back to the way they were. But deep down, he knew they couldn't. That chapter of his life had ended, and it was time to turn the page. But turning that page was harder than he had imagined. As the days turned into weeks, James slowly began to rediscover pieces of himself. He spent time with friends, reconnected with hobbies he had long abandoned, and allowed himself to feel the pain without burying it. And slowly, he started to understand that healing wasn't about fixing what had been broken, it was about moving forward, even if that meant doing so alone. The story ends with James at a crossroads. He hasn't figured out what comes next, but he knows one thing: the road to healing is his to walk, and the choices he makes in the coming months will define his future. He doesn't know if he will ever forgive Laura, or if their marriage will ever recover. But what he does know is that he's no longer just a husband. He's a man learning to navigate a new life, a life that's uncertain, but one that still holds potential. What would you do in James's shoes? Could you move on from the betrayal, or would the pain be too much to bear? Could love ever be rebuilt after something so deep has been broken? The answers are not clear. And that is the hardest part of all.